Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to this second Quodlibet. Warm welcome to everybody. And good morning to our dear friends from South America and USA. It's great that you are there. And today's motto is Ask Me Anything. My name is Linde Brunmeier-Tutz. I'm teaching at the University of Music Trossingen in Germany, transverse flute. And I'm extremely happy to welcome Barthold Kuijken today. Bart, it's wonderful that you are here with us. Thank you for being here. It's a great pleasure to get this chance to speak with you today, to discuss with you our ideas, our questions on different terms on early music. You have been active in the field of early music since more than 50 or 60 years even, I would say. You are having an enormous, broad and profound experience and insight in all different fields of historical performance practice. You have contributed a lot to all different developments as an artist, as a teacher, as a scientist, as an expert of historical sources. In our last Quodlibet, we were discussing this term HIP. Peter van Huygen proposed to change that into culturally informed performance instead of historically informed performance. Many people anyway say that the term early music in German, it is alte Musik, is outdated and not anymore fitting to our actual practices. So in the announcement of this Quodlibet, you, Bart, say that you're still fascinated by the value and the depth of an HIP approach to music. Why is HIP understanding so important from your point of view, and what is your definition of early music?
Well, that's a long question. I will start with the end. Early music for me is all music we have no idea how it should be played, which means 99%. That's all music of which we have not enough information. We have no direct sound documents from the composer, for instance, or we have conflicting information about so many elements, so that we need to ask questions. I am, of course, not so naive to think that the composer will have played his own music the best way. I mean, not all composers are fantastic performers. And I know just as well that no performer will have played the same piece twice the same way. I mean, I would have loved to hear Bach play one of his harpsichord pieces, let's say 5 evenings in a row, and record them and make a scientific study of all the differences, just in order to see that, well, the language is the same, but maybe the words are not. So if I speak about early music in those terms, music, we have no real documents about how to play it, then that means that we have to get documented, get information. And we can also go another way and say, well, all that information, it's totally superfluous. I am the genius, I am the performer, I play the way I want. And well, good old Bach is dead anyway, so he can't stop me doing what I want. It's another way of thinking. I could say it's not my way. I'm not going to say it's a wrong way. I find it's a little bit egotistic, maybe, as if the performer were more important, let's say, than the composition. But probably that's a choice. So that's about early music. Yeah. Early music, that means there is more and more of that every day. Yeah? Early music doesn't stop with the birth of Mozart or with the death of Bach or whatever. And when I hear today, let's say Ravel or Debussy, I am quite convinced that it's totally different from what we can hear on older recordings, how it was performed in their times. Is that better? Is it worse? I would love to hear the opinion of the participants, because it's not my aim to give a whole lecture here, but maybe more my aim to ask questions.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to ask Bart something, please do write it in the chat, because we are so many, I will not see everybody on my screen. So if you have questions or comments, please write them in the chat, and I will give you the floor, and I'll try not to miss anybody.
Good.
Yeah.
So you're all invited to ask questions.
Yeah, so there's already Lenny Fenton having a question. Would you like to voice that? Would you like to tell it yourself?
Sure, thank you. Mr. Kuijken, I wonder, you referred to the performer's relationship to the music in your earlier remarks. Using your compass analogy, do you see any shift in performer positioning in recent years? And has there been any corresponding lessening of commitment to authenticity that you see in early music performance?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I have seen a great change. In fact, in both the so-called standard world of modern players and in the so-called hip informed players. And I must say somehow, I must laugh sometimes, they are joining forces very well together. They become more and more similar. In other words, many of the modern performers have learned a number of things from the, let's say, informed group of musicians. And so they try to do. Maybe they understand, maybe they understand less, maybe they copy, maybe somebody coached them, whatever. But I feel that there is an interest from the modern side that is steadily growing. And from the old side, let's say, from the hip side, I see almost the contrary movement, in the sense that it seems to become interesting, and that's a very bad word in music. It seems to become interesting to go against everything that you could have learned in so-called performance practice, with a bit the idea, I am the star, I am the performer, nobody's going to tell me what to do. And it's maybe a way that is also commercially successful. It becomes flashy, can become sexy, however you want to call it. I sometimes have the feeling that we get further and further in the historical field, further and further from the sources. And one of my, let's say, hopes would be that good musicians would not feel ashamed to learn a lesson by all the old documentation that there is. And anyway, we have to learn it, we have to digest it, put it into practice. There are no recipes, and certainly no quick, easy recipes. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
I wanted also to quote from this flute dictionary you have by Susan McLagan. You have written a very nice sentence there. The fundamental question is not what I can do with the piece of music, but what does this piece of music ask from me? And what is the most appropriate way of achieving this? I mean, that's a wonderful guideline.
Well, for me, it is a kind of key guideline in what I do, or the way I look at music. And that awakes my curiosity also, and that's a good thing. Because the danger of always doing my thing, pulling the sheet towards my side, like we say in Flemish, yeah, is that I tend to do always pretty much the same thing. And if the curiosity is there, and I keep reading, I keep searching, and each time I read something different. So each time I say, well, I have read Quans probably for the 20th time, and I still read different things I hadn't seen before. So all that keeps you a bit more flexible, I think, and mainly curious, eager to be surprised. And I made a comparison to a friend not so long time ago that in human contact, if you would tell a friend or your partner, I know exactly how you are, and you would, that's the way you would handle also, you would be towards that partner. I don't think that marriage would last a long time. I guess that in a relationship, you want to be surprised also. You want to see the new things. So that's a bit the same with music for me. If I think I know this piece and I know how it has to be played, then it risks to die. But on the other hand, if I try to make it new for newness sake, for novelty's sake, then I'm on a completely wrong path. Because that's not the point.
There's another question by Michael Melzer. Michael, do you want to ask yourself what you'd like to know from Bart? Great that you're here, Michael. Hello. Would you put your microphone on? We don't hear you.
Now?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Great.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's so wonderful that one of the great masters that we have in early music and in music in general is still proving to be so young, not only in his living, but in his life, but also in his mind, and curious and optimistic. And it gives, I think, so many people so much energy that it's important. I think it's important to say.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Bart, for that. Really. Now, what I would like to ask is please, I feel that for quite a lot of years, we are dealing with a makeup of music, especially with the makeup of early music. We are dealing with instrumentation and with the technique of playing and with ornamentation and with pitch and with intonation and with all kinds of around things about makeup. I would like to hear you speak about the essence of music. Now, I believe the real big change that happened through the last 200 or 300 years now is the fact that the supremacy of a counterpoint was neglected and harmony overcame it. We can find it in all kinds of fugues written for keyboards from Bach on and even before, and forgetting the essence of music making, which is a social conversation between different speakers, different voices who are speaking to each other and reacting to each other, which cannot be done in a fugue or polyphonic music made on one instrument by one person, even if he has 12 fingers. It doesn't matter at all. They don't listen to each other. So, in fact, what we lost is the social thing, the human connection between people making music. Now, this could be something that can help us, especially nowadays with the coronavirus situation and everything. And I would like to to hear you speak a little about that, please.
Yes. Well, music as a language is, of course, a very important thing. Music is a way of making connections. As an amateur musician, it is a way of making connection to yourself. That's no shame. That's very good even. And I am totally aware of the fact that this constantly making connections to myself, to my own emotions or sense of structure, or call it whatever you wish, love is a good word for it, maybe, is one of the ways to, well, to stay active, to live the music again and again. It doesn't die. And the fact that as a musician, you constantly handle your own emotions and structural mind, I think is something that makes you happy, that makes you maybe healthy even. Yeah. Now, of course, connection is not only to yourself. I started with that because I believe that if the connection is not to yourself first, it's not going to be very strong towards other people. Sometimes it's said, it has to do with a kind of reciprocity, that feelings go back and forth. And if they don't go in, how will they go out? You know? Now, we can deal with an audience in a number of different ways, I think. We can want to surprise the audience by being the fastest, the loudest, the highest, the most flashy, the sharpest also. Yes, we can really treat the audience as a group of dummies who constantly need to be entertained. If possible, not only by sound, but then we need video at least. And we need ballet on St. John's Passion. And that kind of, what I would say, nonsense, sorry. Yeah. So there is that factor of entertainment. And maybe our visual culture of television has helped a lot in that direction. I hear so many people say that they went to watch a concert, not to listen. And well, I heard from some students who told me that their teacher was reproaching them, that they didn't move enough. Interesting. So that kind of indicates what's happening from one point of view. You could also try to be, instead of being, well, thundering high above the towering high above the audience, to be good friends with them and make only the easiest way of playing, something they can easily digest, never a long piece, never a difficult piece for them. The idea of the best of, Mozart's G minor symphony in the version of James Last, for those who are a little bit older, you will remember what it is. Yeah, it's another way of making contact. Many people love that. So you have contact. My question with that is, where do they have contact with? In the first case, they have contact with your genius, maybe I could say vanity, your superiority, more maybe than with that of the composer. In the second case, yeah, maybe they have contact with the cheapest version. I compare it to literature, what used to exist, Reader's Digest, a long novel of Dostoevsky in 20 pages. And somehow, I won't say the essence is not there. Some of the essence is there, of course, but it's not really what I think composer could have had in mind in the first place. So those are different attitudes we can have towards an audience. But with whatever attitude we have, I think, for me at least, in a concert, the important thing is feel that there is this connection between individuals in the audience, among them, with me. I always compare it to a kind of giant spider's web. And you touch one little thread and everything is touched somewhere else. So this is for me the kind of essence. And I would repeat that for me, that first chapter of having the contact to myself, honestly to myself, I don't need to impress on myself, you know. Some people want to impress on an audience, but I don't need that for myself. Yeah. And from there on, maybe questions will come. How to play, what is it? What is the essence of a piece, and what would I want to communicate to an audience? Do I want to communicate to an audience how well I play? Well, if you want to do that, do it. You know, maybe then compose your own pieces that make a good showcase of that. But I wouldn't say use other people's compositions in order to pursue another image, let's say. Is that a kind of answer? I would want to say one more thing about your fugues. Yeah. I do believe that even a harpsichord with only 10 fingers makes his fingers listen to him and is able to play a 4-part fugue where the 4 parts of the fugue are communicating with each other. But that's my belief, or that's my experience also, having heard people doing it.
I've also heard an expression from you, Bart, which shows a very high aim to the performer. You speak about the super reality of a performer. Maybe you want to elaborate that yourself. Considering the historical and the personal authenticity and how to get balance in that. But I think this expression, super reality, is really fantastic because it also shows a kind of obligation, a kind of profession we follow as musicians.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I start with the authenticity.
Yeah.
In a quick way. I mean, I always split the concept authenticity in 2 halves. There is what I would call the personal authenticity, which I could define as don't lie. Mm. Don't lie to yourself, don't lie to others. Be honest with yourself and thus to others. Don't play one note you don't believe in. If you can't believe this must be an E, play an E flat. Even if it doesn't stand there. I give that example because that's exactly what I did in the first recording of Telemann Fantasies. Yeah? It is a mistake now, I know it, but then I didn't. So that is what one could call personal authenticity. The other half is what I could call historical authenticity. And we all know that we will never get there. We will never play like good old Bach did on the 7th of May at 5:30. Yeah. So all we could do there, in the sense of historical authenticity, is try to play in such a way that if the composer would listen to us, he wouldn't say, idiot, go home and practice. You misunderstood everything. So it is a kind of trying to understand his language, his message, and trying to do that, and trying to play in a way he wouldn't have disapproved of, even if he might have done something else. Maybe he could say, well, I never thought of this, but this is nice. Nothing against. But I can imagine a lot of ways of performing where a composer would say, I never thought of this, and I'm happy I didn't think of this. So that's the other half. Now, for me, the personal authenticity also includes don't cheat yourself. Stay honest, don't fake. Every affect that is in the music has to get into me, but it's not for me. I mean, I'm a professional musician, I play for other people. So it should get in and should get out again to the audience. As if there would have been, as if there would be a mirror somewhere in my back or so. The affect has to go through the body, be reflected in the mirror and get out again. And I don't need to be afraid that I won't be personal enough. It is my mirror, it's handmade, I would say. Yeah? Has uneven things, have colored spots, blind spots, etc. Yeah? So that is for me part of the don't fake things. If I try to build a performance that is outside of myself, I put it out of me, let's say in between me and the audience, or I put myself in front of at the wrong side of the music stand. Instead of being behind it, I put myself before it. Yeah? So in order to describe that idea that every affect has to get in before it can get out, I often use that word that Linde quoted, that kind of super reality. Of course, every affect I find in whatever Bach piece, for instance, they don't need to be my affect privately at that moment. They cannot be, or not ever. I must be able to play a happy piece when I'm not happy, and vice versa. Like any actor must be able to. And it is not faking, because if it's faking, I become cynical. I would say, that eternally pretty Telemann, what a bore, but I can play him so well. And he sells well. Yeah? So that is what I would call faking. And therefore I use that idea of super reality. I know very well that the affect that a certain Bach piece or whichever piece provokes in me is not my private feeling. It's more than that. It's not less than that. It's more than that. And I compare to, you could compare to many things. One story I sometimes tell is that my youngest daughter, when she was a kid, she played that she was a princess. Of course, like all girls do, but that's very nice. Of course, she knew very well that I'm no king and my wife is no queen, so that she was not a princess. But we had to address her as princess all day. He couldn't just call her by her name and say dinner is ready. Oh no. And that's the kind of super reality I mean. It is much more than real. And if we can have that, I can also let those affects come in, even affects that are not really typical for me. An example I give, I could very well imagine playing Bach's Aus Liebe and having absolutely no Christian faith. But as long as I play it, I must have, or I must be able to live into that. And after the performance, I can give it back to Bach with a great thank you. Yeah? And that's an expression I heard from a very good colleague of mine who said that every piece we play, we kind of borrow it from the composer. And like things you borrow from your neighbor, you want to give it back in good condition, unharmed. Is that kind of answer to you, Linde?
Yeah, thank you. There's a new question in the chat.
Yes, please.
Eva Ivanova, may I give you the floor? Do you want to speak yourselves?
Hi, Eva. You have to unmute, yes.
Hello, yeah. So yes, I can try. My question was, for us, for example, Barthold Kuijken or Linde Brunner-Tutz, you are our like gods of the early music. And then sometimes, for example, I have this feeling, people in my generation, we play a little bit different or sometimes a lot different. For example,
I hope so.
And for example, if you don't like the ideas of my interpretation, does it mean these ideas are bad, or it could also mean they are just different and we shouldn't look always for approval from your generation?
Did you always do what your mother told you to do?
Oh no.
Okay. Is that an answer?
Yeah, but for me, so it is historical performance. So the idea is to continue the old traditions. So, and
is that the idea? I would say the idea is to understand the pieces.
Okay.
And not necessarily to update them.
Mm-hmm.
I can become quite sad when I see an opera, let's say Orfeo by Monteverdi. And then, of course, Charon has to be probably a Nazi officer. Yeah? It needs to be updated. And today it all has to happen in modern city, etc. Are we, I mean the audience, are we all so primitive that we need constant updating? I don't really believe that.
No,
So my curiosity would go to the non-updated version. I wouldn't want to read Shakespeare in a transliterated way where it has become prose and modern American English. Why would I? And that is the same with me when I play music, whichever music. I will try to understand, I do my best in all possible ways to understand what a composer might have meant or might have expected his performers to do.
But isn't that difficult? Now we are having so many different new means, new media, for instance. Mm-hmm. If composers in former times would have had these possibilities, they would have used it.
Yes, if Bach would have had a Steinway, he would have used it. But the music he would have composed might have been pretty different. Might have become Boulez.
It is difficult because we did, for instance, in school, a performance of a Monteverdi pasticcio, just different pieces in scenery. And the scenery was made by music design, so by digital media. Mm-hmm. And I was honestly very skeptical. But the result was actually strengthening music. It was very aesthetical. It was with a lot of respect for the music, maybe also.
Mm-hmm. So much better.
Yeah, and that was a new way of presenting Monteverdi, not in historical costumes, but with interaction with means of today.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have heard fantastic performances of earlier music on modern instruments, performances that touched me very much, and I could so-called prove every other note is historically wrong. So on the historical authenticity side, I could say you didn't pass the exam. Mm. But the personal authenticity and the force of conviction can be so great. There is a real story that has been told. And I can get very much touched by it. Still, I would be curious. I would love to have seen how Monteverdi's Orfeo, for instance, which seems to have been a pretty rich production, was performed. I would have loved to see an original Wagner. Why not? And do we need, and that's maybe my question that comes back, do we always need this update? Are we today not anymore capable of jumping a number of years back and reading a piece, reading Goethe, and not needing, again, the translation into, let's say, Günter Grass German? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it is difficult for young people because they want to use their language. And in a way, it has to do with a huge amount of knowledge we have to collect, of course, information. That's what is historical information. And at the same time, yeah, we need a bridge to our life now.
What I would say is probably repeating. If I see a new score in front of me, just first time I look at it, or an old one, and I act as if it was the first time I look at it, I get curious, what is the message that comes from that score? And do I want to transpose that into a television message? I don't feel that necessity at all. And I really believe that a performance that does not use video or that just uses the means that were, let's say, reality for the composer is still able to convince us. Just like we can look at a Rembrandt painting and we don't need to exchange all the heads by Picasso heads.
Yeah, that's a very clear example. That's convincing.
Yeah.
I see there's a comment by Livia.
Hey,
Livia,
Livia.
may I give you the floor?
Hey,
Hey, hello.
Livia.
Hello, Sandro.
Hello.
Hello, great seeing you.
Yes. First of all, I cannot even concentrate from the emotion I'm feeling to see you and together. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. But what I wanted to ask Bart is, in the very moment of playing, in the moment of the concert, what is his principal focus or focuses? And if this has changed through the years. No, Bart, of course.
Sorry.
Thank you. This is my translator.
Huh?
Yes.
So principal focus, do you mean on the when I'm playing?
Yes.
Yes, on the very moment of playing, in the moment that you are in the concert.
When the concert works well, and when my playing is not too bad, and I'm not stumbling over too many notes, and I can produce the kind of sound I want to produce, I am only focused on what is the word I want to say. But always when you say a word, you want to look at the audience. You want to see or feel the audience's reaction. That's for me the strange thing with this Zoom. I see you, but I cannot smell you. Maybe that should be invented. A smelly Zoom. Yeah. But so that in fact we sense what are the reactions. So that as any good talk to anybody else, you feel that there is a back and forth of flow, let's say, of emotion, of content. And again, if the situation is good, if it works well, my feeling is that I don't do anything. My feeling is that I am being played, but it's not me. So it's not constant. I'm not constantly playing me. Yeah. And if that works, it makes me very happy.
Yeah, I always loved your philosophical idea that music is passing through.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going through us, and we are only medium in that moment.
Yeah, and
probably even not deciding a lot, just letting it flow.
Letting it flow, indeed. So just as my flute is my instrument, and of course I have learned to handle it. And in the same way, I feel that I am being an instrument of the composer, or of the composition, maybe even better. Yeah. I would say the instrument is not so important. I make that stupid comparison. A flute is like a pencil. It can be in wood or in gold. I don't care. What I write with it is more important than the material it's made of. It can be more expensive one way than the other. Yeah. And in the same way, I feel that as a performer, it's not me who is the important entity. And of course, since the music passes through me, it will be colored by me. I don't even need to try to be personal.
Yeah, but in this moment, modern flute players might say, well, couldn't I play then on my modern flute?
Very good idea.
Does it make is the period instrument a necessity? Sorry, that's a stupid question, but it is nowadays very important because there are so many modern players who are fond of early music and like to play that too, of course.
Sure.
But how should we consider that?
I think, in the last many years, I have taught more master classes for modern flutes, I think, than for old flutes, or mixed. That's always my preferred situation. And I see that many of the modern players, and not only flute, but piano, violin, whatever, are very much interested. They usually start at the wrong end. They want to know which ornaments they should play. So I keep telling them, please don't play any. First, understand the text before you start to put makeup on it, to use Michael's words. Yes. Yeah. So that can work, of course. And then I tell them that you can go a very long way with a modern instrument. But at some point, probably, you might feel that you have some limits, in the sense that your modern instrument cannot really do what you feel you would like to do. The information you have gotten by studying that early music leads you to a kind of sound concept. And at some moment, you might feel that your modern flute, modern piano, whatever, isn't the right balance with the concept you have. And then you get in trouble. Two possibilities: accept that trouble and say, well, this is as far as I want to go. And maybe I avoid playing some pieces where that treble is too clear. I would say a couperin or haute terre or something like that on a modern flute. I have never heard it really successfully. But the other answer could be, okay, if I want to go further, if those limits annoy me so much, well, instead of only studying flute and alto flute and bass flute and piccolo and multiphonics and whistle tones, I could also study Baroque flute. And then, you see that there is not just one, but that you need a handful of them. So they become polyglot in the best way.
And another question, I have some remarks already in the chat, but I still want to ask what is doing the use of original instruments with us? I mean, we are playing normally nowadays very perfectionized copies of period instruments. You have started your life in early music with an original, or I guess with several originals, because then there were no copies yet, or no qualified yet. How can we deal with that? Because that's maybe also a message to all of us. We are using period instruments, but are we really having a period instrument in our hands?
Often I feel that we do not have a period instrument in our hands anymore. That there is a telephone ringing somewhere, but let it ring. I think we don't have an origin instrument anymore. They usually are less equal than the modern ones. And that is for me one of the important points where I see that the tendency of modern instrument makers moves in a direction of more and more homogeneity, equality, also towards more and more resistance in the instrument. As a wind player, you should be able to blow. Whereas the old flutes I have played, the moment I started to blow, they would tell me, no, thank you. Couldn't you sing? Could you just talk? So that was a very big lesson and one I had to learn, because the old flutes I had, there was no way I could blow into them as I can today in copies of that very same instrument. So there is a change indeed. And I had to develop another kind of sound ideal or sound production. The funny thing is that I can use that on most of the modern copies, but not vice versa. If I come with a modern concept to the old one, I would say it cracks. This is a bit extreme in my position, but it goes in that way. I feel the same for the bum flute, by the way. I don't hear you, Linda.
Yeah. Now some questions are pouring in, so maybe I'll just switch to those. Radka says that she wants to ask something to the previous topic, so maybe I give you the floor first.
Yeah.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah,
Hi,
we can hear.
yes.
Hi, Bart.
Good to see you.
You were supposed to be here in Bratislava right now, but
I know.
it didn't happen. So let's hope it will happen in future.
Yeah.
I have actually two questions. One is related to the previous topic, and the other one just raised up right now. Speaking about original flutes, how much do you associate yourself or connect yourself to the sound of the flute actually? Because I mean, when we are interested in historical performance practice, we don't let's say we try to find the instruments suitable for certain repertoire, right? Rather than finding an instrument which personally fits to me, as I can see more with modern players. But in the end, the flute, the instrument we pick up for the concert, somehow, let's say, of certain repertoire, somehow also fits to us. How much do you put an importance to how much the flute fits to you somehow? If you understand the question, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. For me, it's a matter of finding the right tool. For me, every instrument has a voice. Some also in tessitura. Some are more contralto, some are more mezzo soprano, coloratura soprano. And I don't see the point of asking a coloratura soprano to sing a contralto piece. Even if she would have the low notes, what's the point? And I know that in the reality of playing concerts, when you play a mixed program, you might have to find compromises, just as the 4/15 pitch is a kind of compromise. But even then, with one instrument, I can try to color it in the direction of, let's say, coloratura or contralto. So yes, I do think that the instrument helps you. it hasn't a set of possibilities. And if I miss them for the piece I play, I just feel I have a knife in my hand, but I need a fork. So then I go for a fork, and I hope it's a beautiful one.
Okay, but if you would give a percentage, how much does it care for you for the concert? If you choose certain repertory, etc., and then the choice of the instrument, is it very important, or in the end, not that much?
It is important, and maybe just as important is the fact how good is the instrument, and how well do I know it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like languages, you know.
Yeah. And the other question was about, so the previous topic, about this feeling or presence on the stage. Is it like some kind of mindset, I rather believe, than some other thing? Did you have to learn it throughout your life, or were you born like this?
I don't know how I was born.
Were you different when you were 30? Or because it's a beautiful mindset, which I find sometimes really difficult to refine, because we are so much trained, especially in modern institutions, like with modern food in conservatories, to play, like to be very original and to be yourself, and it was, for example, one of the very challenging things when I studied with you, to find the way how to be played, not to play, but to be played. So did this mindset, did you have to somehow work on it during your life, or is it really your nature, let's say?
I think it's probably part of my nature indeed. And it became more and more, and it's still becoming more and more obvious that this is for me that is the essence somehow. It is the love of the moment, you know, the love for the piece you played, the love of the fact that you are able to play it, the love of the audience who did the effort to come into a concert hall. And it is the moment. But in fact, when you think of other arts, when you go to a museum and you want to watch once more the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, you go today and you go once more tomorrow and once more the after tomorrow, you might have seen 3 different pictures, paintings, yeah? Because 3 times you are different. Painting probably hasn't changed. Probably the lighting is still the same, and the humidity, the temperature, but you are not anymore the same. That's why you can read a book a number of times. Why you can listen to the same Brahms symphony a limited number of times. Yeah? And I have that same feeling that in a concert or in a performance, it is that moment that counts, that now. And if that starts to happen, then the now becomes a continuous thing, something that you are weaving or so. But it's woven off all little nows, you know?
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
That is very interesting. There are 2 persons waiting to voice their questions, Leni and Marco Crispo. So maybe first Leni, may I give you the floor, and then Marco?
Thank you, Linda. Bart, I actually have 2 questions. One is a follow-up to the question you answered a bit earlier about the suitability of the instruments. And you were talking about applying the correct, let's say, technique to the tool that you have chosen. And you were talking about traverso, and then you said, it's the same thing with the Böhm flute. And I didn't quite understand. Would you mind explaining what you meant by that?
Yeah, very easily. if you imagine the flutes that were played in Debussy's time, the flutes the guys played when L'après-midi d'un faune or Syrinx or the trio was played, and you compare them to today's hottest, most expensive flutes, I have the feeling that I played two different instruments. And again, it's two different tools. And I think every job has a kind of so-called ideal tool. And I don't want to get the wrong tool in my hands.
I understand. Thank you. And my second question is, you have been preparing to record the Bach sonatas again. I think, will this be the fourth time?
Third time only.
Third time. Okay, thank you. What new realizations or ideas have you come to that you may be able to share with us verbally in your preparation for that series of recordings?
That would be a very long answer or a very short one. The very short one could be, by looking at them as if I had never studied them, even more questions pop to your mind. And maybe even fewer answers. The question, what do I read here? What is the meaning of this notation or whatever? And the more you think and the more you know, the more questions you assemble, and that's nice. So that's a short answer. Of course, a long answer might be too long, I think. And should need a score and be a couple of days.
Yeah, and there are more comments in the chat. Marco Crispo, do you want to speak now? May I give you the floor? Hello.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you,
Hello.
everybody. So I'm a conductor, a conducting student, as a matter of fact. So I'm a bit out of this circle, but we daily, me, my colleagues, and struggle with a standard situation, which is experiencing a sound maybe during a concert of an historical informed ensemble, or maybe hopefully with instruments, so you even get how the gut strings are sounding like, and you want to bring that in a standard situation, which is most likely 1-2 days, hopefully, of rehearsal of a Mozart symphony or a Haydn symphony, with an orchestra which has a different idea of phrasing, sound, balance, articulation, and probably never had a physical contact with an instrument, which explains a lot by itself. And we have 2 days of rehearsal, and we would like to try to get closer to what we heard and we have in our minds, or what we feel when we see the score under specific information. The problem is that we often end up in giving superficial directions, which are usually, I mean, the cliches are, non vibrato, fall and accent. We give those things which actually not really much about the content of the music or the style in depth. And you end up with something which actually is sterile. It's in a way superficially closer to what you believe could be an informed performance, but it is not really in the content in depth. So my question is, do you think is first today possible for us to do a proper job getting closer to that way of performing in those circumstances, 2 days of rehearsal, sometimes 3, and which kind of authority eventually do we need as young conductors, which is even worse when you're the youngest and you're on the podium, and you're supposed to guide 40 people in a direction. It can be very struggling. Any tips? Thank you all.
I think it makes everybody unhappy. You as a conductor, because you feel you would want to go further and you cannot. And the players who feel that there is this young guy, he's so tiring, instead of letting us play the way we have played for the last couple of generations, and he thinks he knows better. So we have that kind of, problem there. We probably make the audience not too happy also, because they might not hear a very convinced performance. you feeling that you can't go far enough, and they feeling they have to go in another direction than they want, the orchestra players. So I find this a very difficult situation, and I must say I try to avoid it. I have had a couple of experiences, and I have been invited a couple of times to conduct modern orchestras, and each time politely I say no, thank you. Because I just feel I will be too frustrated. Already conducting a so-called period instrument orchestra, you can be pretty much frustrated sometimes. But I think that's the life of any conductor, isn't it? Yeah? But I don't choose to do that. And I know why. And I remember when people like Harnoncourt or Bruggen started to do that for the first time, let's say with the Vienna Philharmonic or the Concertgebouw Orchestra, you had the kind of, in the orchestra, the orchestras were split up, you had the clique pro and the clique contra. They didn't like each other anymore, there was a big fight. And well, I don't want to fight when I play concerts. And in fact, what you experience is more or less similar to what I said with people who want to play early music on a modern instrument. You can go some way, but you might feel frustrated because you want to go further. And the instrument, and in this case, the orchestra is your instrument, doesn't allow you to go further.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's a difficult situation since early music is so established in concert halls now on period instruments, on modern instrument. Everybody is eager to play that wonderful repertoire, and
Sure.
of course using new knowledges, trying out on any material you are playing. So what is the future of early music? Also, I'm thinking also of education. In my university, we are just starting a secondary profile of early music for modern studies. So students who are studying the modern instrument can also learn the historical procedure of their instrument. And on one hand, I think that's great. That they get to know, that they get a feeling what the old instrument is like when you play it, when you blow it. But are we able to create the same quality standard as with studies that are primarily specialized on early music?
Well,
So
I think,
which direction should we go, Bart?
I think there is one element, one basic question: quality, please.
Yes,
You probably remember that there's sometimes
I remember that very well.
Quality.
And it's a very good recipe, I must say. It functions. It works.
It works. And in fact, that is the same requirement that any modern pianist has. So they shouldn't perform less well on an early piano. And they should become acquainted with that old instrument just as much as they are with their Steinway. And that takes a while. There is no fast way, I think.
Yeah, maybe that's the point. What I was thinking was just this quickly doing something else. And if you study another variant instrument profoundly, then it would surely make sense.
Well, it takes, imagine I would start to practice viola da gamba today. I've played a little bit of it in my youth. Well, before I would want to be on stage, I would need a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I think we could come back to one of your initial questions about HIP, historical informed performance. Whether you call it HIP or SIP or LIP or QUIP, I don't know. For me, it has to do with an attitude. It is the attitude of curiosity towards what is in the piece. and not what did my teacher tell me to do? Or what can I, the great genius, put on top of that music? What kind of ketchup can I spread out over that spaghetti? Yeah? And I think that if we see historically informed performance practice as a kind of totally evident thing, something that I would be just as curious if I would be a pianist and want to play Bartók. I would want to know what he meant, instead of telling him, you, Mr. Bartók, you are an idiot. And anyway, you're dead. But I'm the genius, and I'm going to tell you how Bartók needs to be played. I'm a bit rough here, but this is still an attitude I hear often in performance, as much in modern as in old instruments. And that makes me a bit sad, that lack of curiosity. Because then everything ends up sounding the same. It's the same ketchup over every dish.
There's another question, two other questions in the chat. Eva was asking something
Please,
on the
go
recorder.
ahead.
Eva Ivanova, would you like to speak?
Yeah, maybe the question is a little bit silly, but I played last week Vivaldi Chamber Concerto written for recorder and oboe, and it worked really perfect with Baroque flute and violin. And I know that in the Renaissance time, literature for recorder and for transverse flute was very often the same or really close to each other. And how, I don't know, legitimate is it to play the recorder literature on Baroque flute?
Or vice versa. Or played on saxophone. Or playing a Bach fugue on accordion. If I
Bach
see...
on saxophone sounds beautiful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. If I conceive of any re-instrumentation as a kind of arrangement, then I ask myself the question, is that arrangement, my arrangement, I'm so proud of, is that arrangement honestly good enough? Can it stand just besides the original? Or do you have to admit that the original is way better? I can give an example for recorder players, Corelli's La Follia. It has become a very favorite recorder piece. It's strange, it can be played on the violin as well. If I hear it once on the violin, and then understand how well it was written really on the violin, then even the best, most virtuoso performance on the recorder, I will say, what a pity. If I hear Mozart's violin sonatas, violin and piano, played on the flute, even because there is a historical arrangement, around 1800, a set of those sonatas was published for flute and piano. Now, any arrangement can be good or bad, old or new. It's not because the arrangement is old that it is good. The Mendelssohn violin concerto on flute, I would say, violin does it better. And that's for me the question I have to ask myself with every arrangement, in whatever sense I make. So when I play a violin piece on the flute, I ask myself that question. Does it smell violin too much? Do I really see or hear a violinist just standing beside me and doing it so much better that I just feel ashamed? And then I stop playing.
Yeah, I recently heard some violin and some violin sonatas by Beethoven and Mozart played on the clarinet.
No?
Yeah, of course they are lacking solo repertoire from this period.
Huh? Sure.
It's a challenge.
It's
but-
a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's a challenge for the musician. Maybe I think more of the audience than of the performer. Do I want to sell second-rate quality instead of first-rate? And if I feel that I'm selling not second-rate, but seventh-rate quality, then I feel, do I want to do that?
Yeah, maybe that's individual choice.
It's very individual
yeah.
choice, I know. And I'm pretty restrictive for myself there. And there are some pieces where one movement works so well, and the second movement is even better. And the third, you feel, oh dear, too much violin, no way. And
Yeah, that's a message.
and then I stop playing it.
Yeah.
Or I could play one movement as an encore.
Yeah, it's evident what you mean. So there's another question in the chat. Eleonora, may I give you the floor? Are you
Thank you
there?
very much. Do you hear me well?
Eleonora Biszewicz, are you there? Yeah,
Yes. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay. So I have a little question about cadenze in solo concerti, and which is considering the fact that when we nowadays play a flute concerto, for example, it is already something maybe not so representative of the 18th century because, for example, Quantz would write his concerto, he would play it, and he would improvise his own cadenza in his own style. So nowadays, if I take a concerto by Quantz and I come to the cadenza, I have a little problem because either I decide to improvise it and I accept that probably my style will hardly be exactly as Quantz improvising styles, or I maybe decide to renounce to the improvised part and to take some fragments of some music by Quantz so that I'm sure that the style is the right one. And so the question is, does it make more sense and is it more honest to give priority to a historical approach? So improvise it, sacrificing a bit maybe the style, or to give the priority to a historical style, so to make sure that the music really sounds like Quantz, or like what probably Quantz style would sound, but renounce to the improvised aspect because I write it down. What do you think?
I would give another answer. You could learn the language of Quantz and learn to improvise in that language.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the way I would choose, is become familiar with his language. You can play all his 300 and concertos and know how he speaks, become familiar with that language, and try to play cadenza in which there is not one note that does not belong to his language. That would be my thing. I would not feel like being like this would restrict me, but I have the task to learn his language. I could give another example, the famous great D minor Mozart piano concerto. There is no original Mozart cadenza for it. Too bad. But very interesting for us today, because we could assemble at least 20 different cadenzas from Mozart's own time to today. A very famous one you often hear is Beethoven's cadenza to this, which from the first couple of notes you hear, this is very bad Mozart. This is fantastic Beethoven. That was his choice. And there is one by Brahms, which is nice. There is a modern one that sounds more like Ravel. And at some moment I started to ask myself, but why update a cadenza? Why not play a cadenza in the style of the piece? Do I need a Boulez fragment in a Mozart aria or concerto? And I would say, maybe not. And then I could go back by 10 years And at which moment would they say, yes, but for Mozart, Beethoven is nice? Well, why not Mozart then? I would not necessarily go back much further and play a Bach cadenza, typical Johann Sebastian, in a Mozart concerto. You might feel, that's a bit old-fashioned. So I think staying in the language of the composition is no shame, but you have to learn it.
And at the same time, if you speak a language very well, you start speaking it in your personal way.
Anyway.
So, of course, if you learn the message, the language by Quantz, if you're very familiar with his refined way of phrasing and making ornaments and whatever, in the end, still you will play it in your very personal way.
Yeah, like Quantz will have done himself, one day like this, the next day like the next day, or like Frederick the Great will have done with or without the approval of Quantz. Yeah, but still there is a kind of community of language, I would suppose, that seems to work.
Still, if we consider just the examples of cadenzas by Quantz, he says in one breath. But if you then look to cadenzas written in pieces, it's mostly on 2 or 3 breaths.
Well, I must say I don't agree.
You don't agree? Okay. I thought
there are some
intermissions and
there are some. I have a collection of manuscripts, things each time since 50 years almost. When I see a cadenza, an old cadenza in a manuscript or print, I copy it. So I have a folder full of that kind of things. And I don't think it amounts to 5% where there is a pause or a breathing possibility. And I find about that length of cadenza a very interesting remark in Tromlitz, the flute method, who of course needs to contradict Quantz, as whenever he can, he will say the opposite. And he said, well, Quantz says in one breath, now it can be longer. And he gives an example with a couple of possible breathings. And then he says, but this is too long. So the fact that you could breathe, even in some of the historical ones, is not to increase its length. It can be that, let's say, in the affects, there is a kind of exclamatio where you want to have a pause afterwards that you can use for breathing. But the set of length is still pretty much the same. That was my experience, at least.
Yeah.
Is that an answer for you, Eleonora?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I agree, of course, that the best solution is to learn the language, so to improvise in the language. I'm just wondering if that's really possible in such a, I mean, how much it is possible with such a big distance in time and change, etc. Because of course I'm not going to play only Quantz concerti in my life. So if one day I have to play Quantz and the week after some other composer, I mean, all the problems that we have in adapting the language to our performance, which are huge, somehow in improvisation, they're double as huge because it's not only about how we play, but also what we play. So that's just, but thank you very much.
I remember I once gave a long masterclass about cadenzas in Mozart flute concertos for modern flute class. And I remember that I let the students play all the well-known modern flute cadenzas. So after 4 or 5 of them, you start to laugh because you notice that most of those cadenzas basically are 19th century etudes. Yeah. So at that point, that became more and more obvious. And I said, well, I find it strange that today people would write a cadenza in a style of halfway between today and Mozart. Yeah. Why not go all the way? Or I said, stay in today. And the next day, young flutist, who is now professor, came up with a cadenza for the Mozart Andante, full of multiphonics, whistle tones, etc. Splendid, splendid, totally within the character of that piece, without one melodic hint to the original, nothing. But the atmosphere was perfect. I could only say this is consequent. You live today, you play cadenza from today. But playing cadenza from the day before yesterday, I find that well, you don't drink the coffee of the day before yesterday, do you?
So,
More questions, maybe?
yeah, time is, pressing a bit. We are now drawing, to the end of this Quodlibet already. It's 5 more minutes. So, are there any other comments or questions? Does anybody want to say something that doesn't seem
You
to be
don't
the
need
case?
to agree. You can attack, and I feel safe behind the screen, you know?
Does anybody want to say a word to Bart? No. Well, Bart, then it's up to you. Maybe you want, I don't know, round up this discussion with some words. Maybe you
Well,
like to.
if I would want to round up, I would say the question is hip, passé. Did early music grow old? Wurde die alte Musik alt?
Ja, also auf Deutsch ist es schon krass. In German, it's of course extreme because we say alte Musik, old music.
Yeah, and I would say that's a question which is totally besides the question. The thing is that if we could develop also in the teaching of modern instruments a underlying interest in what does this piece mean, or where does it come from, who has written it, for what kind of instrument, in what kind of culture, what kind of institution, or whatever, so that you do the same what you would do if you have an earnest study of literature or of painting. You want to understand. If I see an allegoric painting of 16th, 17th century, well, I need to know some of the mythology. Otherwise, I just see a couple of nice people on the canvas. So it is like learning about a piece and integrating that into the image, into the understanding I have. And being happy to share that understanding with an audience, not putting my wisdom up front, let's say. That's never it's not about being right or wrong. But I think this is an attitude, and in that sense I said that for me early music is not a repertoire, it is a way of thinking. And for me that is not a way of thinking that gets old.
Yeah, and that's maybe also an answer to the question we often have, what is the future of early music, where it's going to? And I mean, it's exactly what you said, just strengthening this kind of attitude towards music.
Mm-hmm. I think it would improve music, just generally.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be fruitful because we just learn from each other, from vice versa, modern and historical departments.
That's also why I have always loved to give master classes combined for the two instruments, because they can learn from each other.
So there's somebody having a quick question. That's Eva. Sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You want to speak quickly?
Yeah, that's again me. Sorry, I have many questions. Last time, now it's really hard to survive without the public for me. For example, I play last time a lot for recordings, and I cannot have the same feeling like for audience. And for example, I played the last big concert. It was my final exam in November, and I needed maybe the whole last week before the concert to prepare myself mentally, and I cannot do the same for the recordings. And I don't know, there are maybe are there some tips how to play in recording as in the concert?
I would say in a recording, you can imagine a kind of ideal audience that doesn't cough, doesn't read the program, yeah? Doesn't go in and out, doesn't make noises, but is still there. So I always try to imagine that through that microphone, there is an audience listening, but also an audience that should be able to listen to that same recording a couple of times. Very often when I make let's say, live recording, there can be too much, let's say, enthusiasm in it or whatever. And that can be so tiring if you need to listen to it 3 or 4 times. So there is something slightly held back maybe in the recording for me. But the main thing is, again, what do you want to say with your performance? So if I would give one idea, then it could be play very well for yourself first, as a good amateur. And you have the ears of a professional who can listen and can say, oh, Eva, watch out, this doesn't work, watch out, etc. But so that you can be convinced of every note. And then it will do what it can do.
So unfortunately, time is really rushing. There's Michael Melzer who wants to say a short sentence. Let us give him the floor quickly.
One sentence, just Bart, to tell you that listening to you playing and also speaking is like a massage to the soul.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
So that is really a wonderful final word, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we are coming to the end of this Quodlibet. May I express my great thanks to you, Bart. It is so inspiring and it's so wonderful to speak with you. Thank you for all your fantastic reflections and thoughts. It's very inspiring and exciting. And thank you all for your questions. It was great to be here together. I hope that this Quodlibet is triggering more discussions.
I hope so, because that's the aim of this kind of things, I guess, is make people aware of the fact that others are dealing with the same questions. So
Yeah.
good luck.
Yeah,
And
good luck, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So we are looking forward to seeing you all maybe next Quodlibet on 4th of June with Paul Agnew and Ashley Solomon. And yeah, unfortunately, we have to close this session. Now, Sarah, do you want to say a word?
No, nothing else, just that you will receive the recording of this meeting by email.
Good.
And yeah, and just to remind you that we will have an in-person event, hopefully in Trossingen in October 8th and 9th October.
Yeah. So all best wishes to everybody. Have a good time.
All
Stay
the best,
healthy.
Manuel. Thank you all.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon. All best.
Let's hope for live concerts.
Yeah.